Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to our midweek lesson. We're continuing the series on church history. So, if you remember from last week, and don't worry if you didn't join us or if you don't remember, Thabani will fill you in. We had a bunch of great questions, so we definitely don't want to miss out the opportunity on answering those questions. So, are you hopefully able to see my screen? So this was some of the questions that was asked. The first one, who are the sons of God in Genesis 11? Are they descendants of Adam or a separate creation? So on that note, I just want to welcome Thabani, who's on this call, and he's going to answer some of these questions relating to the spiritual realm, which I was just telling Thabani. It's so interesting that the spiritual realm really seems to have gotten the attention of the church here, which is really exciting. And so, hello, Thabani, and over to you.
Good evening, man. Good to see you. Good evening, everyone. Definitely exciting to be here. I just arrived home now, driving through the rain. For some reason, when it starts raining here, people just go crazy. They can't drive anymore. So I just got home, but very excited. So I'll jump right into it. So the first question that Raj just posted there, who are the sons of God, descendants of Adam, or a separate creation. So I think the important thing to note here is that when he talks of the sons of God, I think you've quoted Genesis 11 there. I'm not sure if that's what you wanted to quote or you wanted to quote Genesis 6. But when you look at the context there, you will find that, and there's lots of other supporting material, like I quoted last time, the first book of Enoch. When you go into Peter as well and Jude, they talk about the sons of God. In this case, are referring to, we would generically call them angels, but they are Elohims. In the Hebrew word is Elohim. Elohim is a God in English, or a spirit being. God is an Elohim, but he is the Elohim, and he created all the other Elohim. So what you see, as we also looked at Genesis 1, when God says, let us create man in our image, he is actually speaking to the Elohim, or the divine council, who are the sons of God. And so basically they are created by God before the humans were created. So God, there's always this like a dual family set up, where God has the family in the spirit realm, the sons of God, and he also has the family that he created for the earthly realm, which is human, who are God's image bearers. So I hope that is clear. The second question, Raj?
Yes, thank you, Thabani. Let me just post it. So the second is also actually this is from Jacob and Bina. Also, good question. Is Jesus still fighting the Elohims, or is the Revelation 13 verse 7 war been won and the 1,000 years in progress before his second coming?
Thank
There's
you.
a
Thank you.
lot in that one question.
Very, 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 very good question. Thank you so much for that. So what is important also is to remember that the book of Revelation is a very interesting book that has really, unfortunately, suffered a lot of mistranslations, because there's a lot of symbolism there, apocalyptic literature with symbolism which was very familiar to the original audience, but then we have to speculate a lot, because we are so far removed from that. We are like 2,000 years removed from that culture and how they understood the symbolism of that. They talk of the beast, they talk of all this, the mountains, the horns. It talks of, I know I was looking at that passage, and all of those, if you really look at it, most the context there was, talking to disciples that were going through a lot in terms of persecution at that current time. And so there's a lot of symbolism even about what nations mean. In like the beast will represent an emperor that is yet to come. There's symbolism on Babylon, and Babylon always representing not just a Babylon, but Babylon became to represent empire. It doesn't matter what, whether it's the actual Babylon or it became Rome later on, the Romans and empire. We can have empire even today. It's just always to do with human systems that sort of exert themselves over other humans and in basic rebellion against Yahweh. And and so when you look at Revelation 13, it's really a lot of prophecies that did actually happen. A lot of it was representing emperors and empires that actually came and so on. But it has lessons also to say empire or Babylon is always representative of a power or people that actually exert dominion over other people. And so to say that is Jesus still fighting the Elohims is very interesting because the Elohims have been defeated by Jesus. When it says in First Corinthians chapter 2, in Ephesians, it also talks about how Jesus has been exalted way beyond and above the rulers and authorities. And it actually says if they had known that by the cross, by killing Jesus, that they were actually creating a problem for themselves, they wouldn't have killed him. These rulers and authorities, they would not have influenced those events. So Jesus has been victorious. He has been victorious over the Elohims. That's why they've been dislodged. And he is now sitting at the right hand of the throne, and he becomes the one with all the authority, with all, of the embodiment of God's authority. And so definitely Jesus has won. But what he does do is he then commits and commissions his disciples and commands us to engage in this spiritual battle, because what has happened is we are already saved, but not yet. So Jesus hasn't completely, he hasn't come back to take, completely the new earth and complete new creation. That hasn't happened yet until he comes. But for now, he has won that battle. Our spirits have been redeemed, but we are still waiting. I mean, Romans 8 actually says the whole creation is groaning. It's waiting for the redemption of the sons of God, meaning us. And it says creation is waiting also in anticipation, in expectation. So there's still that part to happen. So there's a lot of debates around the 1,000 year, the 1,000 year period, and all this. So there's many schools of thought on that. But I approach these with caution to say that there is a lot of things that are not very clear, especially when it comes to these. End times messages and theology, and it's very dicey areas to get into. But I think what is important is to understand that Jesus has defeated, and now we are waging that battle with him, and he's doing it through us, the Holy Spirit and the Word. That's why he says, put on the full armor of God. For our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, the authorities. That means the Elohims, and he says those Elohims are still there. They haven't been incarcerated yet. They haven't been judged. That's going to come. And so we just hope in Jesus. That's the hope that we have in the resurrection, in our resurrection. So there's a lot that for we can it would be good to actually have a session on this one day, God willing, to really unpack a lot of these passages in Revelation. I know that it's just that I don't know how I overlooked this. I would have actually put an episode. I think I will post it to Raj. There's an episode on the Icon podcast that Michael Burns does. He actually did a series last year on Revelation. Some pretty juicy stuff there. So I will put the particular episodes and send them to Raj so he can also post them to you guys.
Thanks, Thabani. That's
And
great. Well, let's look at the next one. This is a this is a great question on the first rebellion. If it never happened, what would the world have looked like? Especially if, as you say, mankind was never meant to rule over each other. That's a lovely question.
it's a beautiful question, man. I was thinking, man, we lost out on Eden and being with God, and I could walk lions and stroke them, and nobody would eat anybody, and there would be no robbers, there would be no bosses, no politicians, nobody. Yeah, it's just it would just be so awesome. And so, if the first rebellion had never happened, what would the world have looked like? I don't know, because again, um, there is a lot that we don't know and the Bible doesn't say. I think it's also important to also beg the question, why were these stories written? What is the intent or the intent of the author, and I love to think about it that in Genesis 1, God created a good world. Everything is good. I mean, he approved of creation. He even created the great sea monster. He says it, in Genesis, and that sea monster, the word we find it in Job when he talks of the Leviathan, which is he says it's this terrible creature that can swallow you, that can destroy you, that can overturn boats or ships. And God actually says, I created him. He's part of the good world. He's part of the good of creation, and so the same God who created butterflies and lilies and all this is the same God who created the alligators and the crocodiles and and all those things. So what that would have looked like, I don't know, but what I definitely know is that the biblical authors, what their intent was largely to explain. There's a lot, Genesis is a lot of dialogue, different, authors dialoguing to say, how did we get where we are as humanity? How did the world get to where it is? And who is God? What did he intend in the first place? And this is how we got here as humanity. We wanted to self-govern, self-rule. We were not content with just being image bearers. We wanted to be gods ourselves and determine for ourselves good and bad and all that. So if the first rebellion had not happened, maybe there would have been something else happening. But what we know now is that the story is telling us that God is taking us back to Eden, but a new creation, Eden, a version where we're being restored as image bearers, and God is going to create a new heaven, new earth, and all that. And he has never abandoned that dream, that desire that he has, to have this special relationship with his human image bearers. So I would say that do I know? I don't know what it would look like, but I speculate and say it would have been awesome. It would have been awesome. um, then
That's great. Well, the next one is, let's see. I think
was
we
it?
answered the one on was Cain was worried about other
Yeah.
people. I'm pretty sure we answered that one. The
Yep.
next one is, did the sons of God have a hand in corrupting the humans, or was it purely a human race problem as per Genesis 6?
Great. So in Genesis 6, if you look at the context very carefully, it actually it first talks of man beginning to multiply which is awesome because that's what God wanted in the first place. He asked them to multiply, and then then the sons of God saw the daughters of men, and that they were attractive, and they took as wives as any as they chose. And then Yahweh or the Lord says, "My spirit shall not abide with men or in men forever, for he is flesh." And he gives them, time, 120 days from that time until the flood comes, so that they could work on, they could possibly maybe change or repent. And then he says, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were old, the men of renown. So you can see there that there is definitely something going on here. There is something to do with these sons of God, who obviously are not in a good space. If it was us, would say, Thabani is not in a good space spiritually, when I'm rebelling against God. So they were not in a good space, and so they overstepped their boundaries. I think Jude actually speaks about that they came out of their boundaries where God had prescribed for them to live. And they, in this particular rebellion, it's interesting that it's the other way around. It's these Elohims wanting to go low to become like humans, and to have the same life that God had prescribed for humans. He never meant for them to marry and have children. That was not in God's scope to do that. And so it seems like these Nephilim and these sons of God, obviously if they take these daughters of men and they have children by them, um, when you see other material like in Enoch, it will say that they exposed humans to things that they were not supposed to, or God had not really said they needed to know by now. In Leviticus chapter 16, there's a character mentioned around this is with reference to the Day of Atonement. When the high priest would enter the holy place once a year to atone for the sins of the camp of Israel, for their purification, for their justification. And on that day, there is a character called Azazel. And Azazel in Jewish tradition, and if you read in Enoch again, and Azazel is the one that is ascribed all sin. When judgment is passed on these sons of God that rebelled, God actually says to his other good sons, like Raphael, Uriel, and those, he says, you know what? Ascribe all sin to Azazel. Look at what he has done to mankind. He's introduced all these crazy things. And in First Enoch 6, it actually talks about how they taught men about mining, how to extract minerals from the ground, how to make weapons, taught sisters, please don't take this personally, but it says so that these guys actually taught the humans how to beautify their eyelids. Makeup and jewelry and all that, and so there is a lot of corrupting of the humans. So in Leviticus 16, when the high priest cast lots for the two goats, you can check that out. You can read the whole chapter. There are two goats involved. So they cast lots. One goat is for Yahweh and one goat is for Zazel, which is also known as the scapegoat. So the goat for Yahweh is killed, the blood is sprinkled on the altar and the temple tabernacle artifacts to purify. And then the goat that is dedicated to Azazel, the priest will put both of his hands on his head, and that symbolizes him transferring his sin and the sin of Israel onto that goat. And then the goat is taken alive and cast over a cliff into the wilderness to Azazel. So that was the idea, is that all the sin of Israel must be taken into this goat and sent back to whom it belongs, to whom it would, introduced sin into the human system. So that was the the um, the context of that. So that's a long answer to say yes, they had a lot of influence, and even that's why Paul in the says, hey, you know what? When you see what's happening in the church and in our lives, says, don't be deceived and think that, oh, Raj is my problem, or Jacob is my problem. He says the battle is not against flesh and blood. It's against these Elohims. They influence world systems. They influence world, everything in the world. They influence that. That's why there's all these wars, hatred, abuse, segregation, and all these. Those are coming from that. Um, great. I think.
Yeah, we'll have a couple more.
Um,
So this one is yeah, just wondering on how do the roles and relationships of different created entities, land, sea, vegetation, animals, humans, inform our understanding of interdependence in our world today. And that this is relating to Genesis 1.
That's a very good question. And I think
Mhm.
what I love is that Genesis 1 really helps us to understand God's heart about creation. He says it is good. It is good. Remember, I talked about even he created snakes. He created this says the sea monster. He created, all these things, and it's good. God approved of it. He loved it. And when he gives humans, when he creates the human and he says very good or tov mayod, what he's basically saying is, man, all this is functional. Tov means functional, useful, approved by God. That's what good means. It's not perfect. And so when what God is envisioning is a world that will flourish. He wants it to flourish. He wants the human, when he creates the human, he says, man, you will have dominion, you will have, over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, the beasts of the field. Now, dominion is not the way we look at dominion in our context. When we think of dominion, it's like, man, dominate, be on top, be the boss. What he's talking about, the language that the human is given is the same Levitical language, the language that the Levites are given in the book of Leviticus on how to work and take care of the temple, the priestly work. So it's more of stewards, that will facilitate for the worship of Yahweh. They create an environment, they create an ambience, they create a system, they uphold God's system of worship and helping humans draw closer to God. And even when you look at the way the tabernacle was designed, the temple later, it's all designed to look like the garden. There's trees, images of trees, and all this, and animals, and it's like God says the creation works together. So it's about Yahweh, it's about humans, it's about creation, the animals together. And so humans are meant to. Now think about it. When God then says to Adam, hey, I want you to name these animals, and when you name something in that culture, I don't know, even in our culture, I believe, most of you guys, we have a similar culture in a sense, Asian culture, Eastern culture, African culture. Naming something or having the right to name something or someone is a huge thing. It's like a huge thing. It's like such an honor, and it has a nuance of saying you are in charge, you are the owner of something, and it's just an incredible heritage. And God says, Adam, you name this, and whatever you decide to call them, that's it. And so you see this special relationship that was supposed to ensure, and so Romans 8, I love that because again, Paul talks about how creation was subjected to futility and pain and groaning, and it's all in because of all these distortions that happened in with the humans and the Elohims, and it's affecting creation. in such a bad way. Look at what we've done to our world. Look at what we do to each other. Look at how we abuse each other. One people group will think it's good to subdue another people group or take the resources of another group. We decide to say, oh, we're gonna hunt all these animals. Like now, we used to have lots of lions here. Now there are very few because there's still people hunting them for fun. Leopards are almost disappeared now. All kinds of beautiful animals. We look here, when we were growing up, we used to have butterflies all over the place, and now there's industries being built and all this. And we're asking, when was the last time you saw a butterfly or a chameleon? We used to see chameleons all over the place when we were kids, butterflies, all kinds of birds. Now you don't. And that's not what God wanted. So we depend on each other. I mean, I will not explain about the scientific theories of ecosystems and how we feed off each other, how we need each other in that way. But think about even how they say the Amazon, because of wood poaching, is disappearing, and that has already affected the climate in a big way, because that Amazon jungle was absorbing a lot of our carbon dioxide. I mean, our carbon emissions, and so you can see we need each other. The more we take care of creation, the better. So yeah, amen.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Thabani. There's two more questions on that list. Don't worry, we'll get to it next week. And if you're wondering how does it all relate to church history, we'll get into church history for the
Yeah,
next about 30 minutes, give or take.
yeah.
It's really this is going to challenge all of us. Definitely will challenge me, but it'll challenge all of us because very often the presentation of Christianity, at least that's how it was presented to me. I am pretty sure it was presented the same for you, is about escape. It's about going somewhere else. And by virtue of that, then it doesn't matter what happens on earth. In fact, earth is to be discarded. And that is not the biblical presentation at all. And so a lot of this conversation hopefully is helping you to see, wait, this is about something God is doing, has done, is doing, will do here.
Mm.
And we are part of his partners. We are part of his colleagues, his co-workers to do this. So what that means, and I'll make this practical, when you go out to a grocery store, you smile and you say good morning. You ask the teller at the counter, how was your day? It's about bringing kindness into the world. That is just as much part of image bearing as it is anything you can imagine that you might see as like a big thing. Like, how would we do something on a massive scale? Well, it starts with a smile, but it's very much part of what we are called to be. And that is what the church is called to be, the community that is the alternate society operating with a very, very radically different set of values. And so, with that, let's look at the first 300 years of church. It From 33 AD to about 312. And so let's start with the timeline. A little bit cheesy here. I have a little wristwatch. You know, um, but year zero, if we look at, that's when it's like time. Scholars kind of peg it as the time Jesus was born. Um, It wasn't. They think he was born -4 BC. I'm mentioning that to just say that when you talk about ancient history, it is really, really difficult to peg it down to the accurate, minute and day, minute, second. Okay, so we just have to sometimes work with approximates. So 33 AD is when the church begins. Jesus rose from the dead, and then day of Pentecost, and the church begins. We are in year 2025. So just let that sink in, that in 8 years' time, the church would be on planet Earth for 2,000 years. Okay. Now, I thought about this probably 3 or 4 months ago. It blew my mind. Sometimes we get really antsy. I know I get really, like when is Jesus coming back? Think about 2,000 years compared to eternity. We're talking about like seconds right now. Okay. So it's really not like, oh, Jesus isn't back yet. The whole Bible must be false. And please. I mean, we're talking about a drop in the ocean in terms of time, even if that's a good analogy. So, you know, keep that in perspective. But that's what's going to happen in 8 years. God willing, we get to see it. It'll be 2,000 years. In fact, it'd be even better if Jesus comes back in the next 8 years. And no, I'm not prophesying that. So please, otherwise I'll be a false prophet. So this is kind of where the church began, in Jerusalem, day of Pentecost. And then it mostly went around the Mediterranean. And of course, there's, for those from India, the legend of Thomas going to south of India. It's very cool. And he started a community there. So that's very cool how Christianity spread. And for the first about 40 odd years, Christianity was predominantly a Jewish faith. It wasn't a Christian religion as we would imagine. And so that's my hope for the next 25 minutes or so, to really kind of help us see what it must have been like to be a Christian in the first 300 years. It wasn't like it is today for us. Christianity was seen as a group within the Jewish faith till 70 AD. And that's when the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed, and it irreversibly, at least for now, damaged the relationship between the Christians and the Jews. It became like two different religions. Someone asked a question about Matthew 24. You can please read Matthew 24. A lot of that Jesus is speaking of is of the destruction of Jerusalem. This is again a topic on its own. When it comes to biblical prophecies, you have something called near-term fulfillment and long-term fulfillment. So something like Matthew 24 has a near-term fulfillment within their generation. And yes, there is also a future term that's still pending. And so, but that chapter really highlights the terrible destruction that fell on Jerusalem, the temple destroyed, and then from then on, for most part, Christianity was a Gentile faith. In and Yeah, that's part of our history. So there's some key aspects from year 33 AD to 312 AD. So imagine living not far from this country in Dubai. Not This is all happening around the Mediterranean. It's kind of fascinating. We're not too far from where all this took place. So it spread throughout the Roman Empire, and it was not legal. So this is really important. It was not legal. So what we know, at least some of you lived in places that were seen as Christian nations. I didn't. I'm Indian. I grew up in India. India is not a Christian nation. But some of you do come from what is deemed as a Christian nation. There was no such thing as a Christian nation in the 33 to 312 AD, except for like few exceptions. Um, I can think of one of Armenia, I believe, is the first nation that became Christian. But when we say that, what we actually are saying is the king of Armenia became a convert. And so when he became a convert, he basically said, everybody's a convert. So I don't know how that works. But that's basically what that means. But besides that, the Roman Empire, it was not legal to be Christian, okay? And so what was the attitude towards Christians? Well, here's a document we have. It's written in about early second century, around I think 110 AD or so. There's a governor of Bithynia, Pliny, who writes to Emperor Trajan, Emperor of Rome, asking him, well, what should he do with these Christians? And the emperor's response was brief. And this is from the book, The Story of Christianity, Volume 1. This is from Volume 1, but Gonzalez wrote 1 and 2. So another great resource if you're interested in church history. So the emperor's response to Pliny's question is simple. It says, when it comes to punishment of Christians, there's no general rule that's equally valid in all circumstances, meaning it's case by case. On the one hand, the nature of the crime is such that the state should not waste time seeking them out because they're not legal, right? If they're not supposed to be practicing this. On the other hand, if they're accused and refuse to recant, they should be punished. So on the one hand, the nature of the crime is such that you don't need to waste time. So even though they're illegal, don't bother hunting them down, okay? But if someone accuses them and they refuse to recant, and what that means is recant that Jesus is not Lord. That would be their mark of um, recanting their faith, the evidence of recanting their faith. Then they should be punished. But here's the other thing he says is those who are willing to worship the gods should be pardoned without further inquiries, and that would be the gods of Rome. So if they're willing to worship the gods of Rome, don't go any further, just let that person go. And here's the key. Finally, anonymous accusations should be disregarded. So you can't, if your neighbor is upset with you because, you're making more money than they are, they can't just go and complain that you're a Christian and the authorities will come and take you and then, throw you in jail. So the, emperor is saying, no, you can't have anonymous accusations. That should be completely disregarded. For they are bad legal precedent and are unworthy of this age. The Roman Empire was very big on law, so they didn't want to create a precedence where false accusations anonymously could be made. And so they said, if it's anonymous, don't even bother. So this was generally the attitude of the empire again towards Christians. Now, when I was a young Christian, I assumed that, and I'm not sure how many of you assumed this, but I assumed that Christians were always persecuted. That's not true. For chunks of time, they lived just quietly. Even though it was illegal, they weren't bothered. They just went about their business. So let's look at a few of the key persecutions. The first one happens in 64 AD. That happens in Rome. It's localized. Then you have the one in 90s AD, which Domitian, and that's the one in Revelation. We just read it. So you want to read Revelation with that in mind, that there was a lot happening. So again, the 90s AD persecution happened in Rome, but mostly in Asia Minor. Actually, I'm not even sure if it happened much in Rome, but it definitely happened in Asia Minor. That's why the Revelation is written mostly to those churches. And then 161 AD, Marcus Aurelius, he uh, persecuted the Christians, which is an interesting thing because Marcus Aurelius was a scholar statesman. If you know anything about Stoicism, he wrote a book on it, and he's seen as like a thinking king, like a philosopher actually. But for whatever reason, he just didn't like Christians, and so there was heavy persecution. And then 193 AD, Septimus Severus, uh, not it sounds like a character from Harry Potter, but he was a king and he didn't like Christians. Now, what is happening? Just a brief kind of insight. Rome's power is diminishing by a lot. And so some of these emperors, like Septimus Severus, possibly even Marcus Aurelius, what are they starting to feel is that maybe the dominance of Rome is declining because they're not worshiping the Roman gods anymore. And so the biggest group they find the not to blame for that is the Christians, and they're saying, look, let's just all worship the Roman gods, and then the Roman state would then thrive. And so when the Christians refuse, then of course they become prime target. Then in 249 AD, this was a big one. Decius, he starts to persecute Christians, and he starts to actually do something very unique. Instead of creating martyrs, he doesn't kill people. Instead, he demands that they have a certificate that basically says that they have offered to the Roman goddess, Roman gods. And if they have that certificate, then they are free to live, or free to do business and so on. But if they don't, then they'll either be punished or even killed and whatnot. And so so they didn't just kill Christians; they started to use other methods of coercion to basically bring them into the Roman fold. That's what they really wanted is, hey, you guys have to just come worship the Roman gods and stop with all this other nonsense. And so that 249 AD was quite an intense persecution, but nothing compared to what happens in 303 AD, which is the biggest one under Emperor Diocletian. And in this one, it's empire wide. They just absolutely decimating Christians. It ends in 312 AD. If you're familiar with Constantine, the Edict of Milan, that said, after the Edict of Milan, Christians become the favored religion of the state. And then we'll hopefully look into the Council of Nicaea next week in 325 AD. But as you can see, it's not like persecution the whole time through. There were pockets of persecution in periods of time, and yet there were some empire-wide persecutions as well. So hopefully this makes sense. So were they always highly persecuted? No, not always. And this is important because Christianity also grew, honestly, like unexpectedly in many ways. And so this is a really great book, Rodney Stark, The Rise of Christianity. If you're interested in it, please get it. He highlights a few things that he, as a sociologist, looks into the growth of Christianity. Because on one hand, Christianity should never have grown. And I'll give you two reasons why. One is the fact that Jesus is a crucified Messiah. So that's not a really good selling point, especially when you go out, well, even to, if you preach to the Jews or the Greeks, neither one's going to really accept the crucified Messiah. But it's just a bad marketing campaign. If you really think about it, like, hey, I want to tell you about Jesus who died on the cross. It's like, okay, well, I'm sorry that he died, but what does that have to do with anything? Well, I guess what you don't know is he rose from the dead. But more than that, he actually fulfills the promise God made, and he has launched new creation in the midst of old, and he's gathering the nations, and his Holy Spirit is living with us now. And we are this community that is living out the life of Christ. It's a really incredible message, and that's the message they preached. And so that's one reason why it is surprising that it grew. The second reason, and Rodney Stark mentions this, is by 60s AD, most of the leaders of the Christian movement had died. Peter died, Paul died, Jesus hadn't come back yet. And so you would imagine that by 60s AD, 30 some odd years into the Christian faith, Jesus didn't come back, the leaders have died, the first generation leaders. It should have just sort of fizzled out. But it didn't. Not only it didn't, but about 250 odd years, and it becomes the official religion, or the favored religion of the Roman Empire. Like, how do you account for that? And so here's some of the things that Rodney Stark mentions: social bonds. And so basically, church. The church created social, and I should actually say family bonds more accurately, between non-family people. That was just completely unheard of, where non-family members became family members. So that was one. The second is the theology. So for us, maybe we take for granted when we read John 3:16. Again, remember, not all Christians had access to the Bible. Not all of the Bible was written at different times, right? Like if you lived in 40 AD, you didn't have anything. You had the Old Testament or the Hebrew scriptures. You didn't have the New Testament. So for someone to hear that God so loved the world, he gave up his only son, that those who believe in him can have eternal life, that is just a revolutionary theology. I think we have to be hit by that full force every single time we read it, because the fact that God loves you is not common theology. It just wasn't preached. It wasn't believed. No one ever said it. The pagan gods or any gods, they only extract work from you. That's all they do. The Elohims, that's all they do. They're bullies. But God who loves, man, what are you talking about? And so the theology was very appealing. of course, love, mercy, grace. Um, so things like humility and mercy were seen as weaknesses in the Roman culture. Pity, so if you feel sorry for someone, that was seen as a weakness. And that's so the theology of grace, of love, of unmerited favor was just like, what are you guys talking about? How can this be? And so it was really attractive to many. Social services, so people were taking care of each other. There's stories of people leaving their female yeah, babies to die, and Christians they just leave them in the dumpster, and Christians would go and basically adopt the babies. So there was a lot of things done in terms of social service that didn't exist, and Christians filled the gap. Martyrs. Tertullian has this famous quote: "The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church." So people saw the courage of these martyrs. Martyrdom for many was seen as a calling from God, as a gift from God, not something to choose or not something to chase after, but something you are, I guess, gifted. God calls you to it. And so the courage of the martyrs definitely also inspired the community to to become Christians. And then Christian virtues. So, for example, in Christian virtue, when you read, for example, read the passages in Ephesians about husbands, wives, children, um, family members, how to live as family. So, if you think about the Christian virtue of one man marrying one woman, having a family, being a present husband, present father, being a present wife, present mother, for us, we might be like, yeah, of course. But think about what it does to society when you have that. And probably more importantly, think about what it does to society when you don't have that. When you have a dad who goes and has 10 kids with 10 women, doesn't take care of anybody, and carries on with life, what it does to the social fabric is just absolutely devastating. And so Christian virtues ended up actually becoming a key part of, again, the image bearing society. It started to transform the community. Doesn't mean that the early church was perfect. So please, I want to definitely dispel that myth. The early church was not perfect. They had problems just like us. But these are some of the things that happened in the early church in the first 300 years. So I wanted to focus on, just for the next few minutes, and then I'll end here, on a key takeaway. If you have questions, please type them in the chat. As you see, we will answer those questions next week. The focus on Christian teaching. This is something so important. And I want us to think about church history, think about community history. The word church is the Greek word ecclesia, just means gathering. So maybe think community history, and hopefully we can place ourselves in that community. Again, they weren't perfect, just like we are not perfect, but there is commonalities and there are lessons we can learn. One of the key takeaways in the first 300 years is to focus on Christian teaching. It's fulfilling the second part of the Great Commission, teaching them to obey everything. For two key reasons. One is to combat Christian false teaching. Now, again, we can do literally a lesson just on this, maybe more than one. What is Christian false teaching, you wonder? So, for example, there's this guy named Marcion, who basically comes around and says, you know what? He believes he's a Christian. He says, the God of the Old Testament is a bad God. He's just a different God. He's not the father of Jesus. Get rid of him. So he completely gets rid of the Jewish Bible, from Genesis to Malachi, or Genesis to Second Chronicles, whatever. He just get rid of it. And he says, okay, and then all the New Testament scriptures, get rid of them except keep Paul and some of Luke. So that's an example of Christian false teaching, right? And so the church has to teach their congregants that, hey, I would tell you what Orthodox faith is. So here's an acronym I wanted to share with you on this. This is something I use for myself. It's not like biblical, or it's no scholarly research has gone into this acronym. But just check it out and think for yourself. Like, if you want to know what is Orthodox Christianity, it spells out this acronym CARES. C stands for canonical. Canonical simply means it's the canon of scripture from Genesis to Revelation. So Orthodox Christian faith should hold that narrative together from Genesis to Revelation. So, for example, you can't say the God of the New Testament is different from the Old Testament. That's not Orthodox Christian faith because that then violates the canon, right? It's apostolic, so meaning the apostolic faith. It's the faith of the apostles that we inherit. We don't create, we receive. The Orthodox Christian faith actually resurrects, it gives life, as opposed to false teaching, which actually brings death. It establishes, so Orthodox Christian faith establishes a community. False teaching always divides a community. You can test me out on it. I've unfortunately had the experience of sitting with false teaching and having to debunk it, whatnot. And I tell you, it always does that. False teaching divides, Orthodox Christian faith establishes. And then finally, spirit led. And put it together and you get the acronym CARES. Christianity cares. So if you're practicing a form of Christianity that's uncaring, you're not practicing Orthodox Christian faith. So please follow Orthodox Christian faith because Orthodox Christian faith cares. Okay, so I more that can be said, but I'm running out of time. The next thing that the false teachings they had to contend with is now, of course, pagan false teaching. Sometimes those pagan false teachings, what they call syncretism, they combine with Christian teaching and sort of becomes its own little animal. So they had to contend with all this. Again, imagine having not having the Bible readily available like we do. We are blessed. We are one of the most blessed generations to live in. We have access to this, to the Bible, to biblical resources. It's absolutely incredible. They didn't, and so it was incumbent on the church, teachers, and a community to really invest in Christian teaching. So you had many Christian teachers who would write a lot of things to educate the community, also to help them handle things like persecution and challenges that they would face. And then Christ-like behavior. Sorry for the misspelling, but it's not Chris-like behavior, it's Christ like behavior. So teaching the church how to live like Christ. So, for example, I have to share this. So, um, you know, I'm embarrassed to even tell you, as a Christian, I've gotten angry at different people. I'm not talking just in my family. I'm talking at church. At a time when this brother, and I still feel terrible about it. This was in Durban, and he was supposed to do something. He didn't show up, and I was just livid, and I just mistreated him so badly. I apologized to him, of course, but I still feel terrible. Just telling you that makes me just sad. And so Christian behavior is essential. It's not an optional thing. So if you're a Christian and you're at church and someone's talking and you just start to like yell at them or like scream at them, or they told you they'll bring something and they forgot and you just start like berating them, that's not Christ-like behavior. And so lots of the Christian teaching in the first 300 years included Christ-like behavior, calling people to live like Christ. And how do we do that in community? They never went to the outside community that I know of and said to the Romans, you guys got to stop drinking. You guys got to stop living your moral life, oh, immoral life. They looked at the church and said, we have to make sure we are not practicing what the world is doing, but we are practicing Christ-like behavior, which requires training, which requires intentionality. And so I wanted to leave you with that takeaway that that first 300 years of church was exciting, was challenging, as you can imagine, was illegal. And so it wasn't like, I mean, you had to be careful. Imagine your neighbor not liking you and then bringing a complaint against you. There's this church father named Ignatius of Antioch. We don't know why, but he just got caught and he got sent to Rome to be martyred. And he goes through the seven churches, he writes them letters, he eventually ends up in Rome. But no one knows why. At least I didn't find any information why he got picked on, but he got picked on. Maybe he upset his neighbor or something. So it was not easy being a Christian, but there was lots of opportunities to be a Christian. And eventually we stop at 312 AD. You have the Edict of Milan, which stops all persecution against the church and makes Christianity the favored religion of the empire. And then hopefully, God willing, we'll look at the Council of Nicaea next week in 325 AD. But hopefully you can see spiritual realm dovetailing with church history. You have the good, the bad, the ugly, the messiness, the victories, the defeats, of course, the loss of life, and all of that. And so it's a wonderful thing. Hopefully it's faith building for you. Uh, I'll send out um, these slides to you. At the last slide, I have some resources you can access. Books I mentioned already, you can read if you're interested. There's a podcast by someone named Timothy Easley. I'm not sure what denomination he's from, but he's in Binghamton, New York. I just found it on Spotify, just YouTube. I mean, did a search for church history and he popped up. He's done a fantastic job. Now he takes all this stuff, and honestly, I'm a little jealous, not in a bad way, but because he has the time to spend an hour and a half on one thing, and he's just going through it. Like his church is giving him that opportunity to do it. I guess there's something. And so, if you're interested, you're driving, taking the metro, whatever you want to listen to church history, please do. And he does it really well. He comes from a very faithful angle, and so I'll send you the the slides, but I'll put his name on the chat so you can just look it up on Spotify. I think it's just Timothy Easley Church History. You're welcome to go check it out. Thank you so much for your time and attention. If you have any questions, please do post. And there's one already here. We will pick up on this question next week. But hopefully this has been a helpful session. We answered some of the questions from last week. And just to close out, church is a community of Jesus Christ. It's not a building. It's not an institution. It's people. Church is people, and it's people of the Lord going out into the world to be image bearers, flawed as we may be. But it's not to condemn the world. It's not to judge the world. That's the Lord's department. Ours is to help people, love people, to care for people, to be countercultural, whatever culture it is in your community, your office, your wherever you are, your neighborhood, to how to be countercultural in that. So, for example, if your culture really highlights strength, power, you show Christian power in a way that is absolutely mind blowing. If it is aggression, then you show kindness in a way that's absolutely mind blowing, but not on an empty cup, but because you're filled with the Holy Spirit. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Look forward to seeing you next week.